My dad was a monster. My mom had a secret, shameful job. I was 13. This is how I saved my family. I am 17 years old now, but this story begins when I was 13, a lifetime ago. Today, my life is something I never could have imagined. I live in a nice house with a big backyard for my siblings to play in. The fridge is always full. The bills are always paid. My mom does not have to work anymore. From the outside, we look like a success story. But that success was built on a foundation of secrets, shame, and a level of poverty that leaves scars no amount of money can ever truly heal. This is the story of how it all fell apart, and how, against all odds, I managed to piece it back together. 4 years ago, our family was not a family. It was a pressure cooker with a faulty valve. We lived in a cramped, two-bedroom apartment that always smelled faintly of stale beer and my mother's quiet desperation. There were 5 of us. There was my mom, a woman who was slowly being erased by exhaustion. She worked full-time in the kitchen of a busy downtown restaurant, pulling 10 or 12-hour shifts that left her smelling of grease and bleach. She had a severe, undiagnosed case of carpal tunnel syndrome, and I would watch her at night, silently massaging her own wrist, her face tight with a pain she never spoke about. She did everything. She cooked, she cleaned, she paid the bills, and she tried to hold the universe together for us. Then there was my dad. He was the reason it was all falling apart. He had been unemployed for over a year, a black hole of resentment and self-pity that sat on our worn-out couch day after day. He was a gambling addict and an alcoholic. Any cash my mother left in her purse, any money tucked away for groceries, would vanish, converted into lottery tickets or cheap whiskey. His presence was a constant, low-grade terror. His anger was a sudden storm that could erupt over anything. A lost remote control, a burnt piece of toast, a child being too loud. He was a master of a special kind of abuse, the kind that leaves no visible bruises but shatters you from the inside out. He would tell my mother she was worthless, that she was lucky he even stayed. He would tell me I was a useless, stupid kid who would never amount to anything. And then there were my siblings. My brother Sam was 10, a quiet, watchful boy who had learned to make himself small and invisible. My sister, Maya, was 6, too young to understand the darkness but old enough to feel the fear. And then there was me, Tyler. At 13, I was the third parent. I was the one who got Sam and Maya ready in the mornings, because my mom had already left for her early shift. I walked them to school. I walked them home. On the nights my mom had to work a double, I would make dinner, usually just pasta or sandwiches, something I could not burn. I did their homework with them. I was the buffer between them and my father's rage. I learned to read the weather of his moods, to steer them clear when a storm was brewing. I did not have a childhood. I had a job. And I was not getting paid. Update 1. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. It was the day of Maya's first-grade field trip to the zoo. It was the only thing she had talked about for a month. The cost was $15, a sum that in our household was a significant expense. My mom had left the cash in a sealed envelope on the kitchen counter the night before, with Maya's name written on it in my mom's neat handwriting. I saw it there when I woke up. When it was time to leave for school, the envelope was gone. I looked everywhere. I checked every counter, every drawer, my heart starting to pound with a sick, familiar dread. My father was on the couch, watching television, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the floor beside him. He did not look at me. I asked him if he had seen the envelope. He just grunted, his eyes glued to the screen. I asked him again, my voice trembling. I told him it was for Maya's trip. He finally turned to look at me, his eyes cold and bloodshot. He told me that he had needed to borrow it. He said he had a sure bet, a horse that was going to put us all in the money. He said Maya could go to the zoo another time. Maya, standing in the doorway in her little coat, her backpack on, heard everything. Her face just crumpled. She did not scream or cry. It was worse than that. It was a silent, devastating sob The kind of sob that comes when a 6-year-old first learns what a broken promise feels like. And in that moment, something inside my mother finally, irrevocably, snapped. I had never seen her get angry before. I had only ever seen her get sad, or tired, or defeated. But the sight of her daughter's heartbreak ignited something in her. She did not yell. Her voice was a low, shaking whisper, but it was filled with more power than I had ever heard from her. She walked over to the television and turned it off. She stood in front of my father, blocking his view. She told him to get out. He laughed, a cruel, ugly sound. He told her not to be stupid. He told her this was his house. She told him that it was not his house. It had not been his house for a very long time. He had contributed nothing but misery. He had stolen from his own 6-year-old daughter. She told him it was over. The argument that followed was the worst I had ever witnessed. He got to his feet, his voice rising to a roar. He called her every horrible name you can imagine. He told her she was nothing without him. He raised his hand, and for a terrifying second, I thought he was going to hit her. I instinctively moved to stand in front of my mother, my scrawny 13-year-old body a pathetic shield. But he did not. Instead, my mother did something I never thought she would do. She picked up her phone and she called the police. The arrival of the 2 police officers was a surreal, out-of-body experience. They separated my parents, talking to my mother in the kitchen, her voice a low, steady murmur, and talking to my father in the living room, his voice a series of angry, blustering denials. In the end, they escorted him out. They stood there as he threw some clothes into a garbage bag, his eyes burning with a hateful glare that he directed at me and my mother. As he walked out the door, he looked at my mom and told her she would regret this. He told her she would come crawling back to him when she realized she could not survive on her own. I watched the police car pull away from the curb until it was just a tiny speck of light in the distance. The monster was gone. The apartment was quiet. But as I looked at my mother's face, at the mixture of terror and relief, I knew that our nightmare was not over. A different, quieter, and perhaps even harder one was just beginning. Update 2. The quiet that followed my father's exit wasn't peaceful. It was the eerie, unnatural silence of a battlefield after the bombs have stopped falling. The air was thick with the aftermath. For the first few days, there was a sense of fragile, cautious relief. My mom moved around the apartment like a ghost, but a ghost that was slowly remembering how to breathe. She cleaned. She threw out every single one of his empty whiskey bottles, the garbage bags clinking with the sound of our family's sickness. She washed the couch cushion where he always sat, scrubbing at it as if she could wash away the stain of his presence. Sam and Maya, after a day or 2 of walking on eggshells, began to relax. I heard Maya laughing, a full-bellied, genuine laugh, for the first time in what felt like years. It was a beautiful sound, but it was haunting. It was the sound of what our lives should have been. A week later, a police officer came to the door and served my mother with a copy of the restraining order. It was official. He was legally barred from coming within 500 feet of us, the house or the kids' school. My mom held the paper in her hand and I saw her shoulders slump, not with sadness, but with the exhaustion of a soldier finally allowed to rest. But the relief was a luxury we could not afford for long. The monster was gone, but so was his meager disability check, and more importantly, the illusion that we were a 2-parent household was gone. The full crushing weight of our financial reality came crashing down on my mother. Her job at the restaurant was brutal. She was on her feet for 12 hours a day, lifting heavy pots, chopping endless piles of vegetables. Her carpal tunnel syndrome, which she had always ignored, began to flare up with a vengeance. She would come home and I would see her trying to hide the pain, but it was obvious. She could barely grip a coffee mug. She would drop forks. At night, I would hear her pacing in the living room, unable to sleep. She started working even more, picking up shifts for other workers, desperate for the extra hours, even though she was not getting paid proper overtime. She told me her boss had hinted that if she did not show that she was a team player, her job might not be secure. She was being exploited, and she knew it, but she had no choice. I tried to help. I took on more and more. I became the master of the household logistics. I made sure the kids' homework was done, that their lunches were packed for the next day. I became an expert at stretching a pound of ground beef into 3 days' worth of meals. But I could not help with the bills. I was 13, I was powerless. The end came on a Thursday. My mom came home in the middle of the afternoon, a time when she should have been in the middle of the lunch rush. I knew instantly that something was terribly wrong. She was carrying a small cardboard box. It contained her coffee mug, a framed picture of US kids, and a worn-out pair of kitchen shoes. Her face was white, completely devoid of color. She did not cry. She looked beyond tears. She walked to the kitchen table and sat down heavily. She told me, her voice a hollow whisper, that her wrist had finally given out. She had been carrying a heavy stack of plates and her grip had simply failed. The plates had shattered all over the kitchen floor. Her boss had not been sympathetic. He had started yelling at her in front of everyone. He told her that he had been noticing her slowing down, that she was becoming a liability. He told her he needed someone who could handle the pace. He fired her on the spot. No severance, no warning, just a cardboard box and a final paycheck. I stood there in the silence of the apartment, looking at my mother, a woman who had given everything to her job and her family, and I realized that my father had been wrong. He had said she would not survive without him. The truth was, I was not sure if we were going to survive at all. The monster was gone, but he had left us to starve in the ruins. Update 3. The weeks that followed my mother's firing were the darkest of my life. Poverty is not just about being broke. It is a constant, low-grade humiliation. It is the shame of using the self-checkout at the grocery store and having to put items back because you miscalculated the total. It is the fear that comes with every cough or sore throat, knowing that a doctor's visit is a financial catastrophe. It is the quiet despair of sitting in the dark because you are trying to save on the electricity bill. My mom, despite the constant pain in her wrist, was a warrior. She spent every day on a relentless, degrading job hunt. She applied for everything: retail, fast food, cleaning jobs, but her lack of recent experience outside of a kitchen and her obvious injury were insurmountable hurdles. She would come home from interviews, her face etched with a forced smile that did not reach her eyes, and tell us it had gone well, but the calls never came. Our small savings, the little buffer she had managed to hide from my father, evaporated. We lived on pasta and ketchup. I started skipping lunch at school, telling my friends I was not hungry because I knew we could not afford it. I was 14. I should have been thinking about girls and video games. Instead, I was thinking about how to sneak extra bread rolls from the cafeteria into my backpack for my sister. The change happened about 2 months into our descent. My mom came home one afternoon with a different look on her face. It was not happiness, it was a grim, hardened resolve. She announced that she had finally found a job. She told us it was as a waitress and bartender at a place downtown called the Velvet Lounge. She said the hours were late, mostly nights, but that the tips were supposed to be very good. A wave of relief so powerful it almost made me dizzy washed over me. We were saved. I did not question it. I did not care what the job was. All I cared about was that the terror of losing our apartment, of not having food, was over. The new routine was strange and unsettling. My mom's life flipped. She slept for most of the day, her door closed, the apartment kept in a state of hushed silence. She would wake up in the late afternoon, looking pale and exhausted before her day had even begun. She would make us a quick dinner, her movements rushed and anxious. And then, around 8 o'clock, she would get ready for work. She would disappear into her bedroom and emerge, transformed. She wore black dresses, heels, and more makeup than I had ever seen her wear before. She looked beautiful, but she also looked like a stranger. She smelled of a strong, sweet perfume that seemed designed to cover up other smells. She would kiss us goodnight, her smile tight and forced, and then she would be gone, leaving me in charge. I became the evening parent. I made sure Sam and Maya brushed their teeth. I read Maya a bedtime story. I helped Sam with his math homework. I was the one who checked for monsters under their beds and soothed them after nightmares. Then I would do my own homework, often falling asleep at the kitchen table. I rarely saw my mom come home. But sometimes, in the early hours of the morning, I would wake up to the sound of the front door clicking shut. I would see her, a silhouette in the darkness, moving slowly, like every step was an effort. She would sit on the couch for a long time, just staring into space. One morning, around 3 a.m., I came out for a glass of water and found her at the kitchen table, counting a pile of cash. It was a huge pile, mostly small bills, 5s, 10s, and 20s. She was separating it into different stacks: rent, utilities, groceries. She did not see me standing in the shadows of the hallway. I saw the look on her face. She was not happy. She was not proud. She looked ashamed. She looked defeated. She handled the money as if it were dirty. A small, unsettling question began to form in the back of my mind. What kind of bar paid its waitresses this much in cash tips? I pushed the thought away. I did not want to know. We were surviving. The fridge was full again. The lights were on. That was all that mattered. I went back to bed and pretended I had not seen anything. I became a willing participant in the silence. Our family was being held together by a secret, and I was afraid that if I pulled on the thread, we would all unravel. Update 4. Another year passed in the grim, silent rhythm of our new reality. I turned 15. My life was a predictable orbit around 2 suns. The demands of my siblings, childhoods, and the dark, mysterious void of my mother's nights. The secret of her job at the Velvet Lounge was a heavy, unspoken truth that sat in the center of our apartment. We never talked about it. We lived around it. The piles of cash that appeared on the kitchen table every weekend were a silent testament to her sacrifice, and a silent accusation that made my stomach twist, with a guilt I did not have the words for. She was slowly fading. The exhaustion had settled deep into her bones. She moved with a heavy, labored gait of someone much older. Her hands, especially her injured wrist, were a constant source of pain. I would see her wincing as she lifted a pot, or struggling to open a jar. She had bought a cheap wrist brace from the drugstore, but it did little to help. The doctor had told her that the only real solution for her severe carpal tunnel was surgery, a procedure that would require weeks, if not months, of recovery. Weeks and months we did not have, so she ignored the pain and continued to disappear into the night, returning in the early hours of the morning smelling of that sickly sweet perfume and cigarette smoke. Meanwhile, I was becoming a ghost at school. At 15, the social world of high school is everything. It is a universe of parties, of first dates, of hanging out at the mall. It was a universe I was not a part of. My friends would talk about the new video games they bought, the movies they had seen, the trips their families were planning. I had nothing to contribute. My reality was so far removed from theirs that it felt like I was an anthropologist studying a foreign tribe. My afternoons were not spent playing basketball or going to the movies. They were spent at the public library with Sam and Maya, a quiet, free place to pass the hours until it was time to go home and start dinner. I felt a deep, resentful loneliness, but it was buried under the weight of a responsibility I could not shirk. The TikTok thing started, as most things do in high school, as a joke. I did not have a smartphone. My phone was an ancient, beat-up flip phone my mom had given me, a relic from a bygone era. It could make calls and send texts, and that was it. My window into the digital world was through the eyes of my best friend, Kevin. Kevin was obsessed with TikTok. His entire life was a series of 15-second clips, dances, and memes. I found it mostly stupid, but it was his passion. One day during lunch, he was filming one of his videos. It was a review of the school cafeteria's pizza. He was being loud and over the top, giving it a rating of 10 out of 10 as a joke. I was sitting across from him, eating the sandwich I had packed from home, feeling particularly cynical that day. I took a plastic knife and fork and began to dissect my own limp, sad-looking sandwich with the serious, focused intensity of a surgeon performing a complex operation. I did not say a word. I just gave a deeply serious, deadpan look to Kevin's camera. Kevin, thinking it was hilarious, kept filming, zooming in on my surgery. He posted the video later that day with some dramatic classical music overlaid. I did not think anything of it. The next day, people were staring at me in the hallway. A few people I did not even know came up to me and said, "Sandwich surgeon!" Kevin showed me the video on his phone. It had a few thousand views, a number that seemed astronomical to me. The comments were all about me. Who is the guy in the background? His expression is killing me. I need more of this guy. Kevin was ecstatic. He had never gotten so much attention, and so I became his unwilling muse. He started filming me all the time. He called it the Tyler Chronicles. The videos were never planned. He would just catch me in moments of my usual deadpan misery, and it struck a chord with people. One video, where I gave a dramatic, wordless reading of the ingredients on the back of a vending machine snack, got 10,000 views. Another, where I used my library skills to silently reorganize a messy display in the school hallway while giving the camera a look of profound disappointment in humanity, went semi-viral in our city. I was becoming a local micro-celebrity, that guy from TikTok. It was a bizarre, uncomfortable experience. I felt like an animal in a zoo. People would point at me, whisper, and ask their friends to film me. But a small, secret part of me enjoyed it. For the first time in my life, I was being seen. I was not just the poor kid, the responsible older brother. I was the funny guy. It was an escape. But the escape always ended the moment I walked through the door of my apartment. I would go from being that guy from TikTok to being the guy who had to make sure Maya took her bath. The guy who had to quietly wipe up the spilled milk so his exhausted mother would not have one more thing to worry about. The contrast was a constant jarring reminder of my reality. Kevin and my other friends begged me to get my own account. They told me I could be huge. They did not understand that a smartphone and a data plan were luxuries, as unattainable to me as a trip to the moon. I was a viral sensation trapped in an analog prison. I just kept telling them I was not interested, that it was stupid. But at night, I would lie in bed and think about it. I would think about the thousands of people who thought I was funny, who liked me. And I would wonder what it would be like to have a voice of my own, a platform that was not just me being a background character in someone else's joke. It was a seed of an idea, a tiny, impossible dream. I had no idea that my mom, in her own silent, exhausted way, was about to give that dream the one thing it needed to grow, a chance. Update 5. The next year was a grinding limbo. I turned 16. On the outside, I was a normal high school sophomore. I went to class. I did my homework. I maintained a decent grade point average. But on the inside, I felt like a 40-year-old man trapped in a teenager's body. The weight of my responsibilities was a physical thing, a constant, dull ache in my shoulders. The secret of my mother's job continued to be the unspoken center of our universe. Her exhaustion became a permanent feature of her face. She moved through our apartment like a ghost, a pale, tired specter haunting the daylight hours until it was time for her to disappear into the night. I knew she was in constant pain. I would see her drop things, her wrist giving out without warning. I bought her a better wrist brace with money I had saved from lunches I had skipped. But it was like putting a Band-Aid on a broken bone. The underlying damage was too deep. At school, my unwitting fame continued. I was the deadpan guy, the sandwich surgeon, the star of the Tyler Chronicles on Kevin's TikTok. The joke had a life of its own. People I did not know would ask me to pose for pictures, to give them the look. It was a strange, alienating experience. I was famous for a caricature of my own misery, a misery they did not understand. The pressure from my friends to start my own channel was relentless. They saw the views, the comments, the potential. They did not see the empty fridge, the overdue electricity bills, the fact that my phone was a plastic relic that could barely hold a charge. The idea of having my own account was a fantasy, a cruel joke. I had resigned myself to my fate. My life was about survival, not dreams. My 16th birthday was on a cold, rainy Tuesday in November. I did not expect anything. Birthdays in our house had become quiet, non-events, markers of time we could not afford to celebrate. I came home from school, walked Sam and Maya home, and started making dinner. It was just another day. When my mom woke up that evening, she looked even more tired than usual. There were dark, bruised-looking circles under her eyes. I knew she had been picking up extra shifts. She came into the kitchen and gave me a hug, wishing me a happy birthday, her voice thick with sleep. I told her it was no big deal. After our meager dinner, just as she was getting ready to leave for work, she stopped. She told me she had something for me. She went into her bedroom and came out with a small, slightly crumpled gift bag. I stared at it, my heart suddenly pounding. She had not gotten me a real present in years. Inside the bag, wrapped in tissue paper, was a small, white box. I pulled it out. It was a box for an iPhone. It was not a new box, it was worn at the edges. I opened it. Inside, nestled in the plastic cradle, was a second-hand iPhone. It was an older model. An 8 or 9, I could not tell. It had a small, spiderweb crack in the top left corner of the screen, but it was an iPhone. I looked up at my mom, my eyes filling with tears. I asked her how. I knew how much this must have cost. Even used it was a fortune for us. She just gave me a tired, watery smile. She told me she had picked up a few extra cleaning shifts at the lounge. She said her boy deserved a proper phone. She said she saw the way people at school looked at me, that she heard the stories about the videos. She told me she was proud of me, that I had a light in me, and that I deserved a chance to let it shine. I felt a wave of emotion so powerful it almost knocked me over. It was a toxic cocktail of immense, overwhelming gratitude and a crushing, all-consuming guilt. I knew what extra shifts meant. It meant more nights, more pain, more of whatever horrible, shameful thing she had to do in that awful place. She had bought me this key to another world at the cost of her own body and soul. I hugged her, my face buried in her shoulder, and I made a silent promise to her and to myself. I was not going to let this sacrifice be for nothing. That night, after she left for work, I set up the phone. It felt like holding a piece of the future in my hand. The first thing I did was download TikTok. Kevin and my other friends, upon hearing the news, came over the next day, buzzing with excitement. They helped me set up my account. We brainstormed a username. I chose something simple, authentic. Tyler in real life. Then came the hardest part. My first video. Kevin wanted me to do a dance, a meme, something trending. I refused. It was not me. I told him I had an idea. I told him to just film. I decided to do what I did best. Turn my tragedy into a deadpan joke. My first video was titled, A Tour of My 16-Year-Old Mansion. I filmed it in one take. I walked through our cramped apartment, my face completely serious, my voice a monotone narration. I pointed the camera at the water stain on our ceiling and called it Original Abstract Artwork. I showed them the dripping faucet in our kitchen sink and described it as a custom soothing water feature. I opened our nearly empty fridge and called it a minimalist approach to nutrition. I ended the tour in the tiny closet I shared with my brother, calling it our spacious, dual-occupancy master suite. I ended the video by giving the camera my trademark look of profound disappointment and said, Living the dream. I posted it. I did not use any trending sounds. I did not use any fancy edits. It was just me, raw, sarcastic, and painfully honest. Then I put the phone down and went to bed, expecting nothing. I woke up the next morning to the sound of my phone buzzing. It was not just buzzing, it was vibrating incessantly, as if it were having a seizure. I picked it up. The screen was a blur of notifications. My TikTok video had exploded. It had 100,000 likes. It had been shared thousands of times. My follower count was climbing so fast, I could not keep up. It went from 10 to 5,000 to 50,000 over the course of a single school day. I scrolled through the comments, my hands shaking. They were not making fun of me. They were relating to me. I saw hundreds of comments. This is the most real apartment tour on TikTok. The dripping faucet is a mood. I had that same water stain in my childhood bedroom. Your humor is my coping mechanism. People were not laughing at my poverty. They were laughing with me at the absurdity of it. They understood. For the first time in my life, I felt understood by thousands of strangers. By the end of the week, I had over 500,000 followers. The apartment tour video had millions of views. I was no longer a background character in Kevin's channel. I was the main event. I had a voice. And people, for some reason, wanted to listen. A seed of hope. A tiny, fragile thing I had not felt in years began to sprout in the barren landscape of my chest. Maybe, just maybe, this was it. Maybe this was the way out. Update 6. The first taste of fame was dizzying, but the first taste of money was life-altering. After a month of consistently posting videos, my follower count had climbed to over 1 million. I had found my niche. It was a strange mix of deadpan, sarcastic humor, rooted in the grim reality of my own poverty. I made videos rating the different flavors of cheap instant ramen, as if I were a Michelin star food critic. I did a series called Dollar Store Treasures, where I would buy the most useless, absurd items and give them a serious, poetic review. My audience loved it. They found it relatable and authentic. I was not pretending to be rich or perfect. I was showing them my real life, but I was doing it through a lens of humor that made the hardship bearable. TikTok invited me to their creator fund. The first payment I received was for $127. I remember staring at the notification on my phone, my heart pounding. It was the first money I had ever earned that was not from a chore or a pitying birthday gift. It was mine. I had created it out of thin air, out of my own pain and wit. That night I waited for my mom to come home. She stumbled in around 4 in the morning, looking like a ghost. I met her in the kitchen and showed her the phone. I showed her the payment. I told her I wanted to give it to her. She looked at the screen, then at me, and her eyes filled with tears. But she refused to take it. She told me that was my money, that I had earned it. She made me promise I would use it for myself, for something I needed. It was in that moment that I shifted from just making jokes to thinking like a business. I knew what I needed. I needed better tools. The old, cracked iPhone was a nightmare to edit on. The real breakthrough came a week later. I received an email. The subject line was, "Business Inquiry." It was from a company that made a popular mobile game. They said they loved my content and my authentic voice. They offered me $500 to make one 60-second TikTok promoting their game. I thought it was a scam. I showed the email to Kevin, whose eyes nearly popped out of his head. He told me it was legit, a standard sponsorship deal. $500. That was more money than I had ever held in my hands at one time. It was half of our monthly rent. I made the video, it was honest. I told my audience that a company was paying me real money, which was insane, and that I had to play their game. I then gave a deadpan review of the game while sitting on the fire escape of our building, calling it a pleasant distraction from the crushing weight of existence. The company loved it. The video performed even better than my normal content. And a week later, a check for $500 arrived in the mail. I took the money and combined it with my creator fund earnings. I now had over $600. I did not spend it on clothes or games. I spent the entire weekend researching. I watched hundreds of YouTube videos on budget editing computers. I learned about processors and graphics cards and RAM. I became an expert. I found a refurbished gaming computer on sale, powerful enough to edit high-definition video smoothly and quickly. It cost almost everything I had. When the huge brown box arrived, I felt like it was Christmas. I spent an entire night setting it up in the small corner of the closet I shared with Sam. It was not a gaming setup, it was my battle station. My ability to create content skyrocketed. My edits became cleaner, faster. I could produce higher quality videos in half the time, and the sponsorship offers started to trickle in more consistently. A snack company, a budget clothing brand, a company that made weird gadgets. Each paycheck was another brick in the wall I was building around my family. I still gave most of the money to my mom, who now accepted it, with a mixture of pride and a deep, unsettling sadness. But I kept enough to reinvest. After 3 months of steady earnings, I did the next thing I had promised myself I would do. I took my mom's old, cracked iPhone 8, and I bought myself a newer, second-hand iPhone 12. It felt like an insane luxury. That afternoon, I waited for Sam to come home from school. I called him into our closet office. His eyes widened when he saw the new computer, but I did not show him that. I handed him the iPhone 8. I told him it was his now. The look on his face was something I will never forget. He was the only kid in his grade without a smartphone. He had been so used to being the poor kid, the one who could not participate in the group chats, the one who could not play the games his friends talked about. He held the phone in his hands as if it were a holy relic. He looked up at me, his eyes shining with tears, and just said, "Really?" I told him, really, he deserved it. For the first time, I had not just plugged a hole in our sinking ship. I had given someone in my family a piece of joy, a piece of normality. It was a better feeling than any viral video. My audience, meanwhile, was asking for more. They wanted longer content. They wanted to hang out with me. They kept telling me I should start streaming on Twitch. I was hesitant. TikTok was easy. It was short, edited, controlled. Twitch was live. It was raw. It was terrifying. But I knew it was the next step. The computer was powerful enough. I had a platform to promote it. I created a Twitch channel with the same username. I announced my first stream. I expected maybe 50 people to show up. Over 5,000 people were waiting in the chat when I finally went live. I did not play a game. I just sat there, in my closet, in front of my new computer, and I talked. I talked to them about my day. I answered their questions. I kept my same deadpan, sarcastic sense of humor. And then, the donations started. The first one was for $5, with a message that said, "For your next sad sandwich review." Then came the subscriptions. People were paying $5 a month, every month, just to support me. By the end of the 3-hour stream, I had made over $1,000. I stared at the number on the screen after I ended the stream, my mind unable to process it. This was not sponsorship money. This was not a creator fund. This was a community of strangers, people from all over the world, who liked me enough to voluntarily give me their money. They were investing in me. I started streaming 3 nights a week. The channel grew at an explosive rate. I was not a typical gamer. My streams were quieter, more focused on conversation. I built a community that was supportive and funny and kind. The money was becoming serious. It was no longer about plugging holes. It was about building a new ship entirely. I began hiding the true amount I was earning from my mom. I would give her a significant chunk every week, enough to cover all the bills and groceries and then some. But I started putting the rest, the majority of it, into a separate savings account. She just thought I was doing well. She had no idea I was on the verge of making more in a month than she had ever made in a year. A new plan was forming in my head. A grand, ambitious, terrifying plan. It was a secret. It was a surprise. I was almost 16. My mom's birthday was in 2 months. And my goal, my singular, all-consuming obsession, was to give her the only gift that mattered. I was going to give her back her life. Update 7. The 2 months leading up to my mom's birthday were a blur of double lives. By day I was Tyler, the quiet high school sophomore. I went to class. I took my tests. I walked my siblings home from school. But by night, I was Tyler in real life, a content creator and a businessman. My Twitch channel had grown beyond my wildest dreams. I had a manager now, a guy who reached out to me from a talent agency, who helped me negotiate bigger, better sponsorship deals. The money was becoming surreal. I was routinely making 5 figures a month. I had to learn about taxes, about forming a limited liability company, about things that no 16-year-old should have to worry about. But I worried. I became obsessed with the numbers. Every dollar was another step away from the cramped apartment, another brick in the fortress I was building around my family. The secret savings account I had opened grew at a frightening rate. I hid the true scale of my success from my mom. She knew I was doing well, that my internet hobby was paying our bills, but she had no idea of the real numbers. She was still going to her night job, still coming home in the early hours of the morning, her face etched with a permanent, bone-deep weariness. Every time I saw her put on her black dress and her heavy makeup, a knife of guilt twisted in my stomach. But I knew I had to wait. The surprise had to be perfect. It had to be undeniable. My plan was not just to tell her to quit. It was to physically remove her from the environment that was destroying her. I began secretly hunting for a new place to live. Late at night, after my streams, I would spend hours scrolling through rental websites. I was not looking for a mansion. I was looking for a home. I finally found it. It was a small, modest, 3-bedroom house for rent in a quiet, family-friendly suburb on the other side of town. It was nothing fancy, but it had a small, fenced-in backyard. A yard where Maya could play. A yard where Sam could throw a ball. It had a clean kitchen, a living room with a big window, and enough space that Sam and I would not have to share a closet. It was perfect. The rent was 3 times what we were currently paying, a sum that would have been laughable 6 months ago. Now, It was an amount I could comfortably afford, indefinitely. The day before my mom's birthday arrived, I had saved up a huge amount of capital. I had the first and last month's rent and the security deposit for the new house ready. I had enough money in the bank to cover all of our family's expenses for at least a year, even without me earning another dollar. The time had come. That afternoon, when my mom woke up, I was waiting for her at the kitchen table. Sam and Maya were in their room. I had my laptop open. She looked at me, a confused, tired look on her face, probably wondering what I had done wrong. I told her I needed to show her something. I turned the laptop around. On the screen was her banking portal. I had transferred a large sum of money into her account that morning. The balance was a number she had not seen in her entire adult life. She stared at it, her eyes widening in disbelief. She asked me where it came from, if it was a mistake. I shook my head. Then I opened a new tab. It was my own savings account. I showed her the balance. I showed her the monthly earnings statements from TikTok and Twitch. I laid it all out for her. The sponsorships. The manager. The limited liability company. I watched her face as she processed the numbers. Her expression shifted from disbelief to confusion to a dazed, overwhelmed shock. I let the silence sit for a moment, and then I told her. I told her, happy birthday, and I told her she was quitting her job. Tonight. A strange mixture of emotions played across her face. There was pride. There were tears in her eyes. But there was also fear, a deep, ingrained fear. She shook her head. She told me it was not possible. She said this internet money was not real, that it could all disappear tomorrow. She said she could not just quit. She had to be responsible. She had to give her 2 weeks' notice. I knew this would happen. She had lived in survival mode for so long, she had forgotten how to feel safe. I told her she did not have to give notice. I told her she was never, ever going back to that place again. She kept arguing, her voice filled with a panicked anxiety. She said she had to at least go tonight, to pick up her paycheck and her things from her locker. It was the only thing she had. I told her fine. I said I would drive her. She immediately refused. Her refusal was sudden and violent. She told me no. She told me absolutely not. She said it was not a place for kids, that I had to wait in the car. The intensity of her reaction, the sheer terror in her eyes, set off every alarm bell in my head. The vague, unsettling questions I had been pushing down for years came rushing to the surface. The cash, the perfume, the shame. I knew in that moment that it was not just a bar, and I knew I could not let her go alone. I told her I was driving her, and I was coming inside with her, and it was not negotiable. The argument that followed was short but intense. In the end, she reluctantly agreed, but only on the condition that I wait just inside the door, that I not look around, and that I not speak to anyone. The drive downtown was the quietest, most tense ride of my life. We pulled up outside the Velvet Lounge. It was not in a good part of town. The neon sign flickered, a sickly pink glow in the dusk. The windows were completely blacked out. There was a large, imposing-looking bouncer standing by the door. It did not look like a lounge. It looked like a bunker. My mom turned to me in the car, her face pale with dread. She begged me one last time to please just wait in the car. She said it would only take a minute. I looked at the fear in her eyes, and I knew that whatever was behind that door, she had been enduring it alone for too long. I shook my head. I told her I was not letting her go in there alone. I got out of the car. We walked to the door. The bouncer looked at me, then at my mom, and grunted, stepping aside. My mom pulled the heavy door open, and we stepped inside. The first thing that hit me was the smell. A thick, cloying mixture of cheap perfume, stale cigarette smoke, and spilled beer. The inside was dark, lit only by the same sickly pink and purple neon lights. The music was a loud, throbbing bass that you could feel in your chest. It was early, so the place was mostly empty. A few older, lonely-looking men sat at the bar, staring into their drinks. And then I saw them, the women. They were dressed in revealing outfits, fishnet stockings, and high heels that looked impossible to walk in. They were sitting in a group in a corner, their faces a mask of bored detachment. There was a small stage in the center of the room. On the stage was a single, shiny metal pole, and it was in that instant that my entire world shattered. This was not a lounge. This was not a bar. This was a strip club. My mother, my tired, hard-working, dignified mother, had not been serving drinks. She had been taking her clothes off for drunken strangers to survive. The piles of cash, the shame, the perfume, the exhaustion. Every single piece of the puzzle slammed into place, forming the ugliest picture I had ever seen. I looked at my mom. She was not looking at me. She was staring at the floor, her face a mask of utter crushing humiliation. She had not wanted me to see this. This was the secret she had been protecting, the shame she had been carrying alone in the dark for years. I did not feel anger towards her. I felt a surge of something else, a cold, white-hot rage, so pure and so intense it almost made me sick. It was not directed at her. It was directed at the world, at my father, at the system, at the universe, that had taken this good, decent woman and backed her into this corner, forcing her to sell her dignity for a pile of crumpled $5 bills just to feed her children. My plan to give her a better life was no longer just a nice idea. It became a sacred, unbreakable vow. I was not just giving her a gift. I was mounting a rescue mission. I gently took my mother's arm. Her entire body was trembling. I turned her around, away from the stage, away from the men at the bar, and I walked her out of that building, leaving her paycheck and her things behind. She was never going back. I was taking her home. Update 8. The car ride home from the Velvet Lounge was the quietest journey of my life. The silence was a physical thing, a heavy, crushing weight that filled the small car. I drove, my knuckles white on the steering wheel, my eyes focused on the road. I did not look at her. I could not. I could feel her sitting in the passenger seat, a statue carved from shame. She did not make a sound. She just stared out the window, her body rigid. When we got back to the apartment, the familiar grimy hallway felt like a prison. She walked in the door, went straight to the couch, sat down. And finally, the dam broke. It was not loud, dramatic sobbing. It was a silent, agonizing weeping, her shoulders shaking, her face buried in her hands. It was the sound of years of buried humiliation finally coming to the surface. I did not know what to do. I was a 16-year-old boy, and my mother, my hero, my warrior, had just been revealed to be a casualty of a war one never knew she was fighting. I went to the kitchen, made her a cup of tea, and sat on the floor in front of her. I did not hug her. I did not try to offer empty words of comfort. I just sat there, a silent, steady presence, letting her know she was not alone. Not anymore. She cried for what felt like hours. And then she began to talk. The words came out in a broken, hesitant rush. She told me how it started. She told me about the desperation, about the stack of final notice bills. She told me how a friend had suggested the club, telling her the money was good and that she did not have to do anything she did not want to do. A lie, of course. She told me about the shame of the first night, about the feeling of 100 pairs of eyes on her, judging her. She told me how she would cry in the car on the way home every single morning. She told me that every crumpled dollar bill she smoothed out on our kitchen table felt like a piece of her soul being sold. She did it for us. She did it so we could eat, so we could have a roof over our heads. I listened, and the last vestiges of my childhood died in that room. My anger at the world solidified into a purpose so pure and so powerful it felt like a supernova in my chest. I let her finish. And when she was done, exhausted and empty, I looked at her, and I told her that part of her life was over. I told her she would never have to think about that place again. I told her that my plan was not a suggestion anymore. It was our new reality, and it was starting now. The next morning, my mom called the landlord of the new house. Because I was a minor, she had to be the one on the lease. She explained the situation that her son, a successful online content creator, would be paying the rent. I got on the phone and spoke to the landlord myself. I provided my manager's contact information and proof of income. The landlord, a reasonable man who was more interested in getting paid than in the details, agreed. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. We packed up our entire lives from the cramped, miserable apartment. Throwing away the old stained couch my father had sat on felt like an exorcism. The day we moved was the first day of the rest of our lives. Walking into that new house, that clean, bright, empty house that smelled of fresh paint, was a religious experience. Maya immediately ran into the backyard, her laughter echoing. Sam, my quiet, watchful Sam, walked into the bedroom that would be his alone, and I saw him touch the walls, as if he could not believe it was real. I took my mom on a tour of the kitchen. I opened the brand new refrigerator I had bought, a fridge that was completely, gloriously full of food. She put her hand over her mouth and began to cry again. But this time, they were not tears of shame. They were tears of disbelief, of a hope she had long since abandoned. Over the next 6 months, our lives transformed. My channel and my career exploded. I was no longer just a TikTok star. I was a brand. I diversified. I started a second YouTube channel for longer, more produced documentary-style videos about my life. I hired Kevin, my best friend, as my part-time editor and camera operator, paying him a salary that was more than his dad made. I collaborated with other creators. My income became staggering, a level of success that still felt like a dream. But my life did not change. I stayed in school. I got good grades. I still helped Sam with his homework. I still read Maya bedtime stories. The money was a tool, not a personality. It was the means to an end. And the end was my family's safety and happiness. My mom began to heal. With the constant stress of survival gone, she started to look like her old self. The dark circles under her eyes faded. She gained weight. She smiled a real smile. I booked her an appointment with the best hand surgeon in the state. She finally had the carpal tunnel surgery she had needed for years. The recovery was long, but for the first time in her life, she could afford to recover. She did not have to rush back to a job that was destroying her. Her only job now, I told her, was to heal, to be a mom, and to be happy. With the rental lease coming up for renewal, I knew it was time for the final step of the plan. I had been working with a real estate agent in secret for months. I was now 17, and my company was generating enough provable income that, with my lawyer's help, I could actually purchase property. I bought a house, a real house. The one I had shown my mom online months ago, the one I had saved up for. It was a beautiful 4-bedroom home in a great school district, with a huge yard and a tall, sturdy privacy fence. I did not tell her. I arranged everything. On the day of the closing, I told her we were going for a drive. I pulled up in front of the house. There was a sold sign on the lawn. She looked at it, a confused look on her face. I turned off the car, reached into my pocket, and pulled out a single, shiny key. I placed it in her hand. I told her, "Welcome home." The look on her face in that moment is the single greatest achievement of my life. It was a look of pure, unfiltered, overwhelming joy. We walked through the empty rooms of our forever home, our footsteps echoing, she cried. I cried. Sam and Maya, who I had arranged to be dropped off by a friend, came running in, their shouts of joy filling the space. We were safe. We were finally, truly, permanently safe. The peace lasted for 2 weeks, and then the monster returned. I was in the front yard, teaching Sam how to throw a football, when a beat-up, rusty truck pulled up to the curb. My father got out. He looked older, more worn down, but he had the same arrogant, entitled look in his eyes. He stood on the sidewalk, looking at the house, at me, at my brother. A slow, greasy smile spread across his face. He had seen me. Someone, somewhere, had shown him my videos. He had seen the articles written about the teen TikTok star who bought his mom a house. He did not see his son. He saw a walking, talking ATM. He walked up the driveway, his arms open wide. He told me how proud he was of me. He said he always knew I had it in me. He said he had been going through a hard time, but he was better now, and he was ready to be a father again. He was ready to move in. My blood turned to ice. Sam had run inside, terrified. I stood my ground. I did not raise my voice. I looked at this pathetic shell of a man, and I felt nothing. No fear, no anger, just a vast, empty pity. I told him he was not welcome here. I told him he was trespassing. His smile vanished. The ugliness came rushing back. He started yelling. He told me he was my father, that he was entitled to a piece of this. He said I owed him. He said he would sue me for a share of my earnings. My mom came to the door. She stood behind me, and for the first time, I did not have to protect her. She spoke, her voice as cold and hard as diamonds. She told him he was not entitled to anything. She told him to get off her property before she called the police and had him arrested for violating his restraining order. He laughed. He told us the restraining order had expired 6 months ago. He had checked. He took a step towards us, and that was when I made my final move. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I told him he was right. The old order had expired, but I had anticipated this. I told him that with my new resources, I had hired the best family law attorney in the state. I told him that last week my lawyer had gone to a judge and, using the documented history of abuse, addiction, and theft, had secured a new permanent restraining order. I told him that if he took one more step, he would be in violation of a court order, and that I had 3 high-definition security cameras recording his every move. I pointed to the small, discreet camera above the garage. The color drained from his face. He was defeated. Not by anger, not by emotion, but by cold, hard, expensive logic. He had no power here anymore. He sputtered a few more threats, a few more curses, but they were empty. He was a ghost from a past life, and he had no place in our future. He turned around, got in his rusty truck, and drove away. I have not seen him since. That was 6 months ago. Today, I am 17. I am a senior in high school. I am also the chief executive officer of my own media company. But more importantly, I am a brother and a son. Our house is a home. It is loud and chaotic and filled with laughter. My mom's wrist is completely healed. She spends her days gardening and volunteering at the kids' school. She is happy. Sam and Maya are thriving. They are just kids, free to be kids, their futures bright and unburdened. And me? I aim saving again. But this time, I aim saving for my own college fund. I still make videos, but my favorite thing to do is sit on the couch with my family, watching a movie, the simple, beautiful, normal life I fought so hard to build. I did not just get us out of poverty. I broke a cycle. I took the pain and the shame and the misery, and I built a fortress around the people I love. And inside that fortress, we are finally and forever safe.